We're here this morning for a panel on quantum and security, and I think we've got a great lineup. And I want to thank our supporters and sponsors. First of all, Communitech and its CEO Ian Klugman. Ian will be our moderator this morning. Thank you very much, Ian. I'll come back to introduce him more formally in a couple of seconds. And the Canada-Israel Industrial Development Foundation, Dr. Henri Rothschild, is with us this morning, and I'm actually a director of the foundation, and for that, Henri is on my advisory board, and has been on my advisory board for several years. I think we go back a little bit too long. We're not going to talk about that, but Henri, before he became the founder of CIRDIF, was also chief scientist in Industry Canada and had a number of executive level positions in the Canadian federal government. And while I'm always happy to see Henri, I'm especially delighted today because he brought somebody with him, the renowned Dr. Orna Berry, and we're really delighted to have Orna with us today. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us, and we look forward to hearing from you. And now I'm going to turn it over to our President and Vice Chancellor, who we're delighted to have with us this morning, to say a few words of welcome. Dr. Deborah Mcclatchy.
Thank you very much, Michael. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Wilfrid Laurier University is located on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, and we're grateful to be here to share this land for the purpose of today's gathering. And it's great to have been invited to be here. I'm excited about the topic and about hearing the speakers. Welcome everyone to Wilfrid Laurier University and Lazaridis Institute and this great new space in Kitchener in the heart of the Waterloo-Toronto Innovation Corridor. We're very pleased to be close to our local partners like Communitech that have driven the development of Waterloo Region's Tech Hub, and it's a great next chapter for Laurier to be in this location. Today, I'm privileged to welcome you all to Laurier to take part in this really important discussion. And it is the intersection between theory and practice, discovery and implementation, which provides us with the most exciting challenges of our time. Science is the search for evidence-based understanding. Embracing the unknown is a particularly daunting exercise for those who work in quantum computing because we're simultaneously working on discovery and application. Science, technology, and business rely on the strengths of each to make the application of discovery happen. We're proud at Laurier to be operating in those in-between and unexplored spaces, not unlike quantum science, that brings science, technology, and business together in places such as the Lazaridis Institute and our Launchpad. Engaged research and enriching partnerships are cornerstones of our new Laurier strategy, which we just launched. And we recognize that future-ready people, organizations, and countries need to be working across disciplines and boundaries to meet their potential. Today's event is just one example of how we aspire to achieve our goals. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you especially to our presenters who will lay the foundation for what will, I'm sure, be very interesting and fruitful discussions. And I'll now invite Dean Kelly back to get things started. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb, and thanks for joining us this morning. We're actually filming today's panel because we know that a lot of people were interested and who weren't able to join us. And so we will put that up on the website shortly. Now, I'm going to turn this panel over to Ian Klugman, who is the moderator. I think everybody knows Ian, so he told me not to introduce him. But he is the CEO of Communitech, which I think, can I say it is the leading economic development organization in Canada? Would that be a fair?
I don't know. Waterloo. There we go.
What, in Waterloo? I think he's modest. I mean, everybody knows the important role that Communitech plays in this community. And we're really delighted to have the support and Ian's presence this morning. So Ian, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for joining us here today for an interesting conversation. And we do want this to be interactive, and we're going to find ways for you to share your ideas and comments along the way. This whole notion of the topic of quantum and being prepared for what this means for us is something that we all should be in a way, should be thinking through, and in a way, we're going to have to figure out how we become agile and respond, because nothing is ever going to be as we think it's going to be, especially in this crazy world called quantum. We're not only located here in Waterloo Region, we're also, of course, privileged to be sitting in the heart of Quantum Valley. The brain child and the significant investment that Mike Lazaridis, along with other partners and investors over the years, have given us a footprint and a density of quantum information science, mathematics, and computing that rivals any location on the planet. And so while this is an exciting and emerging technology for all of us globally, it's also one that's very important to us here locally because of the course we have an opportunity to play a significant role in not only how this is going to shape our future in our world, but how it's going to impact us as a community and as a country. So we're very, very privileged to be sitting here in this unique little community that also happens to be one of the highest concentrations of quantum mathematicians in the world. We're also privileged to be joined by some very interesting panelists here this morning. I'm going to do a truncated version. I've got 16 pages of bio here. So allow me to...
You can skip me because I will introduce myself.
I will skip you. The only thing I'm going to mention is it says here that she's the first lady of Israeli high tech, and I'm dying to hear what that's going to mean. But thank you so much for joining us.
This is because I'm good looking.
And then I'm going to introduce, of course, Mike Mosca. Mike is involved in all kinds of things. He was one of the co-founders of the Institute for Quantum Computing in town. He's founding member, one of the founding members of the Permanent Institute for Theoretical Physics, and all kinds of other things that make him a remarkable person and perfect for this panel. He's co-founded CryptoWorks 21 and et cetera, it goes on and on. So thank you for joining us here today, Mike. Scott Totsky, of course, he's the CEO and co-founder of Icera. And before that, he had leadership roles at BlackBerry and a whole bunch of other places. He worked at EDS at one point in time. It doesn't give any details as to what he did there, so we'll just skip over that. And then, of course, we have Lois Tullow. Lois is executive in residence at the Global Risk Institute in Toronto. She's involved in Novera Capital, which, of course, is a virtual currency out there. And she's CRO and CCO. C is a common letter in her titles. At JVerify, which, of course, is doing some really interesting stuff around verification and blockchain. And there's a whole host of other things that she has done along the way. She started out at Clarkson Gordon, I noticed, in Calgary, which you don't look old enough to have worked at Clarkson Gordon. And of course, she's involved in a lot of community organizations in Canada as well. So we've got just a remarkable group of individuals together. We're going to have a great conversation. We want it to be a big conversation, including all of you. And with that, we're going to kick things off with Dr. Orna Berry. She's going to do a presentation to sort of frame the conversation for today. Dr. Berry.
Okay, so about a year ago, this common infrastructure for research in the Israeli Academy of Sciences approached me to evaluate a proposal for a quantum program. The proposal, I didn't like it. The reason I didn't like it was that it was too continuous in using the infrastructure used for nanotechnology in the nearly 20 years before. And even though I'm a computer scientist, I'm not a physicist, and I looked at what is going on, I claim that it doesn't look to me like this is the continuum. It's a new thing, and we need to look at it in a different way. And I will be willing to answer the questions that I'm asking, not the questions that I was asked. And still they came back to me, and we started. So we had a committee of 7 experts. My Tal David, who has been at the Quantum Center here before, is really my major teammate out of the 7 people. And together we composed this program. The program was approved by all the research and development authorities, namely the academic budgeting and planning, the defense, R&D, and the innovation authority, former office of the chief scientist that I used to run many years back, and the Ministry of Science. So all of them agreed together with the Ministry of Finance, because such a program, in order to really create an advancement in key areas that Israel can offer, needs a budget, and significant budget. So who am I? I promised to introduce myself. I have a PhD in computer science from USC. I spent a good number of years being an entrepreneur and spending time also in the venture capital industry. I served for the government of Israel as the chief scientist. There are 2 director general positions that run technology administrations, one in the defense and one in what is now called the Ministry of the Economy. And the budget that I ran was about $450 million a year for different programs in innovation. The most important and relevant to today's discussion are the ones that combine academia and industry, because that is, you'll see in a minute, where I travel from basic science to applied science and to technology. I spent also, during my term in the venture capital industry, I chaired the Israeli Venture Capital Association, and then I went back to operation. I was the general manager for the then EMC Center of Excellence in Israel, about 1,400 people, and eventually became the corporate VP innovation for the global activities in EMC. Dell acquired EMC. I wasn't in good health, and I saw that in order to rebuild what we have built for EMC, I needed to be in airplanes all the time. So I announced my departure. I had about a week to reconsider my future before the Academy of Sciences called me. So what we have done, Israel is a very small country, and we have to focus, because we cannot do what China can do in terms of quantum communication between Beijing and Shanghai, and satellite communication between China and Austria. We're not there. We don't have the same budgets. Nor do we have the budgets that the United States offers. So what we have done is we looked at 2 sides of the coin. One side is where we have a power, where we have a need. Power meaning academic knowledge or expertise otherwise, and need means either industrial or defense. And of course, need in academia is different. It's about strength in publication. You mentioned here mathematics. We have a very strong mathematical team in quantum key distribution or in quantum communication, but those are very small teams. And in order to really create a meaningful area, we need to bring in new researchers. So basically, the key success factors that we looked at, the telescopic issue is that it has stages, and I will outline the stages momentarily. But when we're talking stages, we know that a lot about this science is unknown today. And the fact that Einstein, after believing that there is quantum physics, backed off because of its probabilistic nature and lack of determinism in his results. And we want to be permissive to discoveries that will take 30 years, as well as permissive to discoveries that are already made and being used. So those are the stages. So back to the telescopic structure, if we know or we feel that quantum is going to be a game changer, then we need to do basic science. Basic science is not only to take the current people doing various quantum-related activities and optical-related and other similar or boundary-related. It is about also building a sizable research base and research training that we want to achieve. We believe that once we made the right investment in building the infrastructure, the next investment will be in applied science. And again, this is the other pyramid, which relates to technology, is not really detached from the basic science. Because, for example, I mentioned two areas. I mentioned one, and I will mention another one, like sensing and quantum key distribution, as well as secure quantum communication, are already down all the way in their technology, are always already down. But metaphorically speaking, a lot more will be done in the future. So applied science comes after the fundamentals are understood, and when they want to be tested or proven and put to work, you need to go applied. An outcome of it is components that are coming out of it. And that's a little bit similar for people who cannot just imagine the fact that you combine here different disciplines entirely with physics and probability, with non-determinism that and lack of stability that depend on many external powers. Slowly we're coming with components. So the first components that we already we're using for years, are sensors and detectors. But if I take it for a second to medical equipment, MRI today is about $800 an exam. And if I increase the sensing level by about 10,000, and I build it on quantum technology, I get to treat the patient at $100 an exam, and I get to a resolution of diagnostics that is far, far higher. So it is really worth it to look at what we know already to manufacture and to embed it in new design of systems in order to make them more useful. And similarly, there are other issues, and I will talk about sensors also as atomic clocks, because today, when we have jamming of GPS, we had a fully civilian runway closed in our main airport, international airport, because of our friends in Syria and in Gaza Strip using electronic interference. Once they use electronic interference, it jeopardized the communication with the GPS satellites. When you have atomic clocks to do the synchronization locally and be as precise, often you're far more stable than when you depend on GPS in general. So a lot of it is forthcoming. And then once you started with components, the engineering is very clear. We go into systems, we go into services and applications, and we talk about GPS independence and cyber encryption. And I talk about encryption way before I talk about decryption, because of the fact that it's much less complex at this time. So there are several principles that we have to understand better in our basic science. And for example, entanglement is one element that once we are clear about how to apply it, we can come to massively parallel computing, which at this moment we cannot yet, because of the fact that there is a significant deviation from proper, what we would call proper digital synchronization, and we're learning how to do that. The superposition is somewhat the source of it all, in the sense that we don't know for sure when we have a qubit whether it's what state it is in. And consequently, putting those two together postpones the ability to do massively parallel computing with deterministic results and with equivalence to digital computing, though we know that we'll be able, once this is solved, to do far more in terms of computation. So just in order to advance, we already have technologies around the basic principles, and sensing and the optical are the first ones to be there, but also in mathematics, we do know how to do quantum key distribution at this time without needing the physics, but using the equivalence math. And then the impact. The impact is tremendous. If JP Morgan is the first one to make a significant investment in quantum, it means that financial data protection, the way data is stored encrypted has to change, because if we're concerned about future generation of decryption, then we want today to start storing the data in a way that it is not easily decrypted. Also, communication needs to be secure, such that no tapping on the lines can be introduced. And what I said about JP Morgan, I can also say about intelligence, and I can also say about transportation. Some people who deal with autonomous vehicle will say that their biggest concern is the security. Their concern is not about the safety in the sense of how much the sensors can assess multi-vehicles and road conditions, like we had on the way from Toronto to Kirchner today. So the other issues, drugs is a completely different aspect of it, because when we talk about drugs, because we're talking with new materials, then potentially we can compute specific, basically way more than personalized medicine is today. we can talk with drugs. And material imaging, I already mentioned in the case of MRI that going 10,000 higher in sensitivity with lower prices is not a far-fetched issue. And just to put it in the context of security, then I mentioned atomic clocks. And basically atomic clocks are very good when we think about jamming and spoofing and cybering GPS. And I just want to remind everybody the weekend and the attacks on the Saudi plants. If you would be able to capture the drones, basically overtake the communication to the drones and modify their operation, you are protected, and that's a cyber issue. It's not just a physical anti-missile and aiming, which by itself is a possibility because all those systems are very heavily digital. But I'm saying that markets like energy, transportation, finance, defense are all related, and the use of atomic clocks today in systems has gone up very quickly. Something that was on the market for 25 years, dual use, it's not only defense, is suddenly put in use. So secure communication, as I mentioned, the quantum key distribution, and consequently quantum authentication because of the fact that when you touch a quantum entity, it is being modified. And already in some places, quantum internet is evolving. It's not only in China, but for example, in the Netherlands, it is being deployed as well. And in the future, we expect to be able to break anything that seems like RSA encrypted, and we expect to have a completely different AI applications because of the fact of the speed and the massive parallelism and the fact that you the whole search will be totally different, hence the deductions will be totally different because much more information is available. So the topics that we picked on because of existing capabilities among the physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and computer science capabilities. And by the way, computing and simulation at this time is not a computer science game, it's more a physics game. Communication, sensing, materials, foundations, and innovative technologies. All of this is what we have picked, not all of it for the first year. And basically, we looked even at 30 years programs because we know that, for example, massive quantum computing is 20 years, 30 years down the line. And, but this makes it easier to look back into what is currently available for the first 5 years. So if universities can look at the budget of 5 years and other innovation and defense authorities are looking at different structure of their budgets, we built it in such sequences that we look at the 5 years, but we can also budget it incrementally. So I think that this reflects the budget division. There are some vertical and some horizontal issues in the planning. So if we want to expand the human capital, it's a horizontal issue. if we want to deal with quantum key distribution, it's a vertical issue. And the bubbles here reflect the division of the budget. And because we don't have yet a new government, though we already agreed on the budget with the Ministry of Finance, because some of it will be definitely added specifically for that. I cannot specify the budgets, but it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, for sure. So this is where I come from into the quantum area. It's not the first time that I build a large program, but certainly this was one of the more exciting one. And in order to do it right, we teamed up with some American people who were involved with building international programs. And we learned from them what they see in Israel and what they see worldwide. And the crossing of it emphasized to us what we are good at and we can proceed in, or what we must have and we haven't done it before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Orna. That was great. And congratulations on obviously a tremendous amount of hard work done on this initiative.
It's mostly fun.
It's mostly fun. We've heard there certainly is a fair amount of narrative out there around significance of the quantum challenge and the quantum opportunity, but and we've heard certainly some people liken it to the sort of the next arms race in the world. Mike, Scott, how big an issue is this really? Is it just about security? Give us a sense as to sort of how big this thing really is for us.
Who did you want to start with that?
Either.
Mike, you want to start?
Sure, I can tee you up.
Okay, great.
To hit it, now you got to hit it out of the park.
It'd be my pleasure.
So it is more than security. I mean, there's a great. I mean, when we started this effort here and around the world 20 or more years ago, it was just a very speculative idea. And as Dr. Berry outlined, this isn't a new application or algorithm. It's a whole new paradigm for physics that just offers new infrastructure and platforms for the most part, we don't know what we already know is already exciting. So there's what my friend Bill Munson calls the happy quantum. There's all the wonderful positive things we can do with quantum computing, and we're just starting to understand the actual business applications and what the use cases are. That's really been accelerating a lot in the last 18 months, even with many startups in Toronto, Waterloo, around the world, trying to figure out what could I do with this quantum hammer. And she mentioned JP Morgan, and there's many other banks and other institutions trying to find out how can we create more value with quantum computing, with quantum sensing, and so on. So that is a huge opportunity. Now, with any new capability, you have to understand and mitigate the associated risks, right? Again, one of the opportunities is better cryptography to secure us against other attacks. But just in general, so what are there any risks associated with this? And indeed, our friend Peter Shor showed us in 1994 that it'll break the foundations of our digital economy, right? It'll break public key crypto, it'll weaken symmetric crypto, break public key crypto. So these are buzzwords for most people, but if you look at the technology stack and you go down and you have, platforms like cloud and so on, beneath that you get transport layer security and IPsec, VPNs, blockchains. Below that you get crypto. Okay? And quantum computing will just decimate the current algorithms that are baked into pretty much all of our lives, every aspect of our lives. So if that sounds bad, it's because it is. It's a very it's a big problem, but fortunately we've known about it since 1994, and as human nature normally tells us, we largely procrastinated, but that's starting to change now, because the threats are, it's a blessing in disguise, as I'll quickly get to. Obviously, there's a chance, as Dr. Berry mentioned, information that's being transmitted today, it's being recorded in many cases, and that can be everything in the past, today, and until we finally make our systems resilient to quantum attacks, all that information is vulnerable, can be sold, put on the web, sold on the dark web, or who knows what. There's a serious risk of systemic collapse of critical infrastructures. If that sounds bad, it's because it is. The third risk is a rush. If we play the, well, this, I could put this off another 6 months to the, oh no, the threat is here. We're going to make a ton of mistakes retooling the very foundation of our digital economy. That's bad. It's already bad as it is, and this would just make it worse. And the fourth risk, which is, now those first three risks I told you, it's one of these things which intellectually we understand, but we don't change our behavior because we see the light, we change our behavior because we feel the heat, as I've heard from my colleagues. And there's not a lot of short-term heat, but this fourth threat, I think, could happen in the next 2 to 4 years. As the next major milestones of quantum computing are achieved, when we have the fault-tolerant qubit, for example, then the timeline is not enough to do this transition if you haven't already started. So that's the fourth threat. It's loss of confidence in our infrastructure, in our leaders, basically, because when people find out, wait a minute, we didn't prepare for this, and we've known about it since 1994. And that's a short term, that's within your role, right? Within your political mandate, within your mandate as a CIO, and so on. So that's a short-term threat. But the blessing in disguise is, we have a choice. By fixing this problem, we have to retool the foundations of our digital, the security foundations of our ecosystem. That's a hard, painful thing. Cryptographers, at BlackBerry and around the world, we would have liked to do this already, just because, no criticism of the people who built what we have today. They were just, there was no dress rehearsal, right? We built the internet one step at a time. We never planned for it to be the base, put our entire lives, on it for the most part, to a large extent. So it's not perfect. Of course, hindsight's 20/20. There's many things we would have fixed. And the so-called quantum threat is forcing us to fix this foundation. And while we're doing it, we can rebuild it to be stronger than it ever was and ever would have been. So there is a very important light at the end of the tunnel. And in terms of seizing the economic opportunity, like this, the quantum cryptography and the quantum safe cryptography sort of pillar, in a sense, comes first and can pave the way for us to reap the fruit of all the happy quantum side of the equation as well. So I think it all fits together rather nicely in terms of being proactive to defend our cyber systems against quantum attacks. And as that industry grows and we build a more robust digital economy, we can continue to start, we can take more and more benefit of the other quantum opportunities.
Well, that's quite a setup. So, as Mcclatchy said, and he has a great theorem that expresses, there is an element of timing here that we have to worry about, and the timing is unknown. And when I look at this from an IT kind of systematic view, and there's a lot of complexity that's going into what do we have to do to be properly prepared. So we have this unknown timeline, but we know there is a finite window that we have to address it within. And there's a lot of other unknowns that go along with that, which further complicate things. So we have an unknown set of future cryptographic algorithms. Mcclatchy and his colleagues at the University of Waterloo around the world, both in academia and in the commercial context, are working with NIST to define what are the next standards for cryptographic algorithms. But they're still years away from being finalized. And from a technology standpoint, that's almost the starting block, because then you have to worry about how you integrate those into your systems. And then you have to worry about how you get those systems deployed so you can properly protect yourself. And Mcclatchy talked about the pervasiveness of cryptography. I mean, we use it thousands of times a day, even if we don't use technology at all, just doing a software update for your phone. And you may ask, why is this different? From an IT perspective as a CIO, it's embedded in my standard operating procedure. I know I have to patch my systems. I know I have to do upgrades. It's something we probably do on a monthly basis based on the training that Microsoft has given us over the last 2 or 3 decades. But this is different because we rely on public key cryptography to verify the authenticity of a software update. And if we're too late in deploying this next generation of cryptography and this next layer of foundational security, we won't be able to trust a software update. So it goes from something we can do as a routine part of operating our business to something that is a much more of this chaotic state that Mcclatchy described, where we have to do something in a hurry. And if you do something in a large, complex technology, and you do that in a compressed time frame, you're more prone to risk and creating more security issues for you. And I think that the last piece of this is, for the most part, we underestimate how hard it is to change cryptography. You could go around and poll government agencies around the world and say, have you completed your SHA-1 to SHA-2 transition? And they will say, no, we haven't. You can look at the US government, who 15 plus years ago started this transition from RSA cryptography to elliptic curve cryptography. 15 years later, they're not done. In fact, they've almost abandoned that because of this quantum threat and decided they have to do something else. So it is not easy to change that foundational layer of security. And as an industry, we've really been spoiled for the last 40 years. We've had great standards in RSA and ECC that have not really been changed. And I don't think you can look around the technology industry and find some other piece of foundational technology invented in the 70s or early 80s that is largely unchanged today and doing exactly what it was intended to do, to provide security, authenticity, confidentiality to digital transactions. So it's a tremendous amount of work ahead of us. So yeah, there's lots of good benefits that we can do economically from a societal standpoint, but from a technology and risk perspective, it's a huge, huge undertaking to make this migration from where we are today to some yet to be determined quantum safe future.
Lois, when you're thinking about this notion of risk, I just love the notions of quantum threat and happy quantum. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But from a risk perspective, how are you viewing this? You obviously have are doing a lot of work in and around the area of blockchain. How are you thinking about quantum, the risk and opportunity associated with
Yeah,
this?
when you take it back to a business standpoint, and actually it was very good timing because the Global Risk Institute, we are a non-for-profit think tank that looks at risk management leadership, and we're a conglomerate of government, industry, and academia. We had our major symposium, so I got to sit with a whole bunch of other really smart folks yesterday as well, so I'm very blessed. But if you take it back to the business standpoint, and we really do focus on sort of government and financial services, that, and we heard from Katie Taylor, the chairman of Royal Bank last night, and she spoke about what the board is really looking at, and it's really strategy, talent, risk, and everything else. So if you think about quantum as sort of part of that risk and other, the competing factors within, both from a financial institution and government side of, here we've got net income margins that have decreased to almost nothing. We've got, low interest rates going off into the future. From a government standpoint, we've got $17 trillion of debt. So in competing for a far in the future, trying to convince people around a very complex topic. The people in the room today are not representative of the level of understanding that you are, sort of communicating to. And I consider myself a novice in quantum, but a novice compared to the average I'm thinking today. How am I going to take this away and turn this into something that, our readership can understand? The other thing that they're really looking at is, my area of research is non-financial risk. So how do you take quantum as part of cyber dependency, blockchain, AI, bringing that all in and looking at that compared to cybersecurity? Tried to quantify that, said, okay, that's too difficult. Let's just quantify cybersecurity. So there's a quantum article around cyber quantification coming out, and where quantum fits in is really on the systemic risk. So if you think of the tail distribution of losses, you've got high frequency, low severity around phishing. You've got sort of the medium distribution around coming in and taking your database. And then you have systemic risk, which really looks at very high severity, low frequency. And that's where quantum comes in when it wipes out all the encryption. And financial institutions are now just in, as well as government, the very early stages of trying to put a quantification around that. And once they put a quantification around it, then they can actually address it from a budget standpoint of we should actually be doing something about this. Because from a risk standpoint, if you think about, insurance, you buy, car insurance because you think, not because you think you're going to be in an accident, but because you could possibly be in an accident. And this is the type of, sort of the level that it has to be communicated with business and government so that they will address this very real threat.
Are they doing enough? Is business doing enough? Or is it just are there too many other, we're all dealing, not only are we dealing with this disruptive technology, it's kind of like dealing with the invention of nuclear electricity and the internet all at once, because we've got, machine learning, we've got quantum, we've got, so many of these disruptive technologies coming at us. Is it too far out? Is it too?
I think on the financial side, they're starting to just sort of see on the happy quantum, if you look at algorithmic quantum, but on sort of the gating and the security side, they think that that's farther out. And on the government side, unfortunately, because governments are so in debt, if you look at our Ontario government, they're just looking to cut everything that they possibly can. And when you weigh that against 37,000 people on the waiting list for long-term care, immediately, it's not an easy choice.
Other thoughts on this? Orna, are we doing enough? Is government doing enough?
No. The issue is that we always have to operate on conventional, well-understood matters at the 80% level, and we should allocate 20% for the unknown. So whether it's an exception of a flood, or whether it's an exception of a maturing science that is returning, the ability. When I first came to Canada as an entrepreneur, Kanata near Ottawa was another Silicon Valley. And thinking about Canadian universities and the fact that you could be there, whether it is in Waterloo or whether it is in Kanata or elsewhere, you could, and this would put you in a much better position. I think 20% of the government money should be well invested in the future. And the future, science is an important part of it. And picking up the exercise that I have demonstrated is of a smaller country, 9 million people, with greater existential problems, that is putting money into education. And Henry and Tomoko can say that half of our drive, even though we spent a great deal of time delaying because of that accident on the highway, but half of my time I spent on a call talking to the president of the Weizmann Institute and talking to somebody very senior in the Ministry of Defense Research and Development, because those issues are very important and the people understand it. And the government, what we did is also explain it to the government. And I fully agree with you that it's difficult to explain to people who are coming from a budgetary economical view, but we did it the following way. First of all, we asked the right question. Secondly, we gauged what can be done in Israel. Thirdly, we offered how to do it. And then we went on to do an economical analysis and a budget planning, which were done by people who So it happened that we picked a professor of economics who used to work for Intel in budget, and we created something that then the Minister of Finance understood. Where is the risk of Israel being there or not being there? And the penalty for not being there, talking in commercial revenues, talking in defense and the ability to create deterrence and survival, and talking about the economy that needs to grow in order to sustain the other expenses and to bring quality education as well. When we parsed it that way, they understood. And this is not the first time that I'm going through the motion of explaining to the government that, yes, part of it is the interest of firms. But the firms will come only if we show that we have achieved a certain level of competence. And when we compare with countries like Denmark or Holland, or which other countries I took into account, Singapore, those countries already had significant investments, and I'm talking in the tens of millions of dollars by major players like Delft had about $50 million investment from Intel. And the Niels Bohr Institute had a similar investment from Microsoft. And so it goes. So why did they come there? They came there because the program brought the level of knowledge, and not to mention Google, who actually acquired the whole quantum physics department out of University of Santa Barbara, and this is not the only investment that they did. There they acquired the people, they acquired the fab, they acquired the space in the university for the university to benefit from funds in order to create the additional human capital that is required to do that. Other places are less visible, but they're investing in about 6 technologies. IBM now has made a significant investment in Germany. So you see something that is an economical motion that can be or can cease in a few years, but those commitments are meaningful. They say that the places that they engaged with have developed a certain level of knowledge that is already making the basic science into something that is visibly connected to the need. And that exercise apparently was never done in any of those places without significant initial government support. So I have other views that apply mostly, in Israel. For example, Israel is exporting a lot of artificial intelligence technologies, and the government is way behind to improve its productivity by automation and such. And you can see between different offices, like the Ministry of Transportation and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, one has already a significant improvement in efficiency of the services to the citizen, and the other one is way behind. So what is typical is that you come to a menu-driven, of course, if you're not in a digital age, it's difficult, but you come to a certain level and you do it right away and you never have to wait. And in the other one, you can wait for weeks because of bureaucracy and the fact that Many people don't know what their job is in the system, and nobody has rationalized it. So I think that it's fundamental to get involved, to manage those programs right, to move ahead fast, and anyone who doesn't move fast enough may find themselves out of the economical game, because you may decide that only when it is secure that somebody achieved meaningful deterministic results in quantum physics, you go into quantum computing, but others have already dominated the market. So I think by all means you have to, it's a partnership, and the initial fundamental steps need to be taken by governments, and the 20% of future planning is mandatory.
So we see a competitiveness not only between, an increased reliance on the likes of IBM and Google as they make significant investments in this, but we also see a jurisdictional competitiveness as countries are paying attention to this, and obviously a heightened sense of anxiety around this. Scott, you travel a lot around the world. What are we doing enough? Can we compete with IBM and Google?
Well, certainly from a Canadian standpoint, I think we can all agree we're really punching above our weight class here. We've had investments that go back 20 plus years now, McKelly, in building excellence in quantum information science. We've got the University of Waterloo here with the largest faculty of math in the world. I mean, this is really the epicenter in Canada, and we are a model that we know other regions are looking at. The US has been looking at what's going on in Waterloo as a way to model an ecosystem of their own and sort of build that density of talent. But I still think we suffer from some of the things McKelly touched on, is there's a bit of a risk minimization bias here, right? Like we still, when we look at what gets the attention, maybe not just in government, when we talk about like key elements of what keeps our economy running, like financial services institutions, I think you could poll every CIO at every financial services company in Canada and they'll say we have a blockchain project going, or we have multiple blockchain projects going, and it's going to take 5 to 10 years to get that institutionalized. And then you go, well, do you have a quantum safe strategy in place? It's like, yeah, we don't. And do you realize that when you deliver this blockchain project, you'll be increasing the risk to your organization? And that is not kind of part of the thinking, because we're still minimizing the risk. We have an unknown timeline. It's still easy to be a little bit dismissive. It's getting harder, and some of these breakthroughs will make it even harder to ignore that risk. But saying that we need to do something different at this foundational layer of security, which is something we don't ever change, is still a hard problem for business folks, even in critical services and financial services institutions, to get their head around and to properly address within their kind of mid to long-term strategic plan. So yeah, Canada's ahead, but I look at some of these key institutions in Canada, and while we have, I think, some good innovation going on and some fantastic research coming out of academia to say this is the thing we should do, I don't think there's enough kind of movement to start making these changes that we need to do now to protect our critical infrastructure and critical institutions in the future.
Yeah, so just to answer your first question about, do we have a role in this in the international scene? And I think we're not arrogant, but we're very confident based on our track record. We've been there, done that repeatedly. In Scott's previous careers and so on, and we're confident in our ability to contribute, first-rate value to the world and be major
100%.
players in this global ecosystem. So we're not doubtful of that capability. Whether we achieve that capability depends on a lot of the issues Scott has said, and I think Dr. Berry touched upon. And yet, he asked the $1 million or the $1 trillion question there, and it comes down to, I think, organizations, companies, countries, societies that have the discipline and the wisdom to do what Dr. Berry said and what everybody knows we should do, which is, yes, spend 80% of your effort on the urgent, but those who actually have the discipline and wisdom to actually do the 20%, how many jobs give you the 1 day a week to do whatever you want, but you end up doing, just keeping up with your other 4 days of work, right? So, but those who have the discipline to do that will still be around in 30 years. And the others, I think it really is an existential threat to organizations and to countries that don't develop the discipline to go beyond short-termism.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to attend the dinner that Lois mentioned last night, and And Katie Taylor, one of her nice remarks was, success is, we all know success is 10% strategy and 90% execution. The execution is 90% planning and 10% actually doing it. And we have to be doing that 90% planning now, because there won't be time for the doing, right? When Mike Lazaridis, one of my favorite stories from the old days when Perimeter was founded, he told Howard Burton, like, when Howard kind of left his first meeting with Mike thinking he had a job with Perimeter, he's like, well, what am I supposed to do? And Mike said, think.
Yep.
Because once this starts going, you're not going to have time to think anymore. So I think once, now we have time to plan. Once, these key milestones in quantum computing are achieved, forget about planning. It's going to be doing. And if you don't have that plan in place, it's going to be a big problem for a lot of people around the world.
I'll just add on that, one of the things that I think will help is that historically Canada has not had a national cybersecurity plan. They're not there yet, but the players are coming together. The cybersecurity exchange, where now breaches are being reported. Canada is learning from the European Union, which has put mandatory reporting in place. And bringing the players together, the RCMP, other government agencies. And I think that will also push the leader forward to recognize the potential of some kind of quantum security breach and having to get to that planning. So, as in your own country, having the right players at the table to be able to make the decisions, to be able to recognize the need for that 20%.
We're going to open it up now for questions from the audience, if are any. We're happy to hear from you. So this is the official call for questions. Get them ready for us. Yes?
Thanks for everything so far. It's been really interesting. I just want to say that I think quantum cryptography is very important. That's why I'm working on a PhD in it. But just to play the devil's advocate for a minute here to see sort of what it brings out is, sort of from my perspective as both a technologist and a researcher, my perspective of sort of the internet, which seems to be this sort of vulnerable point, is that it is fast-moving and vulnerable because it's decentralized and has sort of this generative contribution sort of structure. And I'm aware, though, that that structure itself also lends itself to great tooling like NPM and YARN. And so from the perspective of a developer, I think the average web developer's process for updating their cryptography library is simply running YARN or NPM upgrade, and that's sort of all they need to do. And so is addressing a large portion of sort of the web-based applications out there as simple as flagging vulnerabilities on those bad crypto libraries that are not quantum secure, providing an alternative, maybe putting someone in the ECMA standards committee, which is not hard to do, and with an experience that these guys are easy to talk to, right? And how much of that can we address easily without having to talk to those like end user companies or developers? And then one final thing is just from a resource theory perspective, quantum computing is very exciting, but in the near term, it's actually proven theoretically that we can simulate any quantum system using a direct transformation to machine learning approaches, which are much more economical right now, since we're spending like $1 million in cooling units alone for 4 qubits and this kind of thing, right? So just the devil's advocate points, I'm interested to see what you think about sort of how to infiltrate the internet and bring standards there.
Do you want to start, or do you want me to
Well, I
start?
can answer the machine learning part.
Okay, you
and
go
I'll
ahead.
leave the hard part of the question
Oh,
to you.
fantastic.
I know you picked that one out of the park, so
Yeah.
I'll take the easy one. There's no general purpose classical simulator for quantum computation. Maybe some specific examples, but I'm not
There is
sure.
exponential scaling.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
That's not, that'll blow up at, under 100 qubits. So right now, we're not in a regime now, right today, where there's something you can do with a quantum computer that we couldn't do with a classical simulator. There's a couple things that maybe, but for the most part, we don't. You think you need to be close to 100, high quality quantum bits to not be classically simulable, right? But that's fine. We're building up. We're building up the software stack. So when we do cross that threshold, and I think we're 6 to 18 months away from organization. People maybe already are sort of announcing, claims, but I think where there's credible claims that they've surpassed what you could do with a classical computer. It's still, we're in the we're in the debating stage now, but I think we're 6 to 18 months away where we generally accepted that we've crossed that threshold. But so what? I mean, we're ready to hit the ground running. Like, we're developing the languages, the compilers, the optimizers, the APIs. So we're ready to reap, the quantum speed, quantum advantages, computational advantages when they're ready. So it doesn't. It's actually, the simulators are helpful in the short term in terms of debugging our compilers and our software tools.
Yeah, so maybe to go on.
The hard question.
Yeah, the hard question, so the internet is made up loosely of a whole bunch of different standards and standards bodies that contribute to that. And it's like an alphabet soup. There's a whole bunch of different ones. Mcclatchy is one of the co-founders of the ETSI working group on post-quantum cryptography. ETSI defines telecommunication standards that we all depend on every day for our mobile phones to work. NIST is doing the core mathematical primitive standardization work. You've got groups like the ITUT who own X509 and IETF who own all of these other standards that are really the fundamental building blocks for how we communicate. So the web case is probably one of the easier ones, right? Because you've got a client in a web browser, and there's a handful of those that will have to be updated. You have the web server, which will largely be certificate-based. So we already have work that's gone on into the X509 standard to allow for quantum safe. But you have all these other protocols where often they're implemented within a certain tolerance in terms of latency, the size of the packets, whether or not things are going to get split across multiple packets, and if it's not implemented exactly to spec, things are going to break. So there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that the assumptions we've made in today's kind of paradigm for connectivity with the parameters we have for cryptography are still going to work when we change the algorithm. So it's not necessarily the complexity of the algorithm, but it might be the size of the key, right? Which then just breaks the way TLS works, and we have to do TLS 1.3.1 or something like that. So there's a lot of work going on, and that work has already started in multiple different standards bodies. I know my company participates in about 10 of them right now, working to ensure that we can move the way we talk. I mean, when you talk about cryptography, ultimately cryptography is this language, and we all have to speak the same language, right? We have to implement systems so that when we have the same input, we get the same output. Otherwise, we don't have interoperability. And that next layer of standards above that is equally critical so that we can build systems that will interoperate like we have today. I go back to, we just not had to do a wholesale change of the cryptographic library. But I think in the browser server, that's one of the easiest use cases because there's only a couple of pieces of technology. And one of the great things about web servers is they are actually very agile, right? We can just add multiple certificates with different capabilities in there, and application developers can update their applications and take advantage of different crypto systems that have been loaded into the web server. So that's one of the easier ones. Some of the other things that we do within how we transact digitally are much more complex.
To expand on that theme about networking, is it possible to think about designing a totally new system that could be compatible with quantum future?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that's going on in ensuring that we have systems that are forward and backwards compatible so that we can kind of go through a staged migration where we don't have to worry about just a complete rip and replace of all of the infrastructure. So some of that work's already being done in the ITUT with respect to the X509 standard to create ways that we can have forward and backwards compatibility for digital certificates that are quantum safe and classically safe at the same time. And so we're already working in that, and then we're seeing how that works. So we've done work with Cisco to kind of prove that out, put stuff on AWS and have a test cloud infrastructure that anybody can go and see how the Cisco ETS server will work with, or EST server would work with a kind of hybrid approach to cryptography. So a lot of that thinking is already in sort of the early stages within the industry to make sure we don't kind of paint ourselves into a proverbial corner and allow for a much more cost-effective transition plan.
Back to Ian's question about Canada's role in all this. I mean, we don't like to toot our own horn, but we've played a really strong global leadership role in coordinating this global effort. Mark Thiesen's in the back, who's chaired the quantum safe group at ETSI, and we've been involved in NIST and so many initiatives. Again, we're not doing it on our own, but we've been providing global leadership in this space for over a decade.
If you look at it from the business point of view, it really is an incremental approach. So IronCAP is sort of one of the vendors that's out there that's providing that initial protection. before you have to go and change the foundational. And if you look at financial institutions that I'm most familiar about, it has been that way all along because they were very early into technology. Unfortunately, a lot of the legacy systems are still there. So they have always had to think in that way. How do we add on? Because sort of the pulling out and putting back in while keeping the business running hasn't been a revenue producing option for them.
Nothing to add.
Yes.
Canada has had technological leadership in certain areas in the past. I think back to the age of nuclear power, where we really had the world's leading technology in safe, reliable systems, optoelectronics. How do we maintain the current leadership and strength we have in quantum looking ahead? In Orna's presentation, the Israelis are taking the 30-year horizon, but dividing it into, as I understand it, into chunks that are more digestible. Being prepared, I think this term you used, has different aspects to it. One is being prepared with the increased threats and challenges that it presents, and the other one is the opportunities. Is it useful for Canada to protect its position in quantum by taking that similar vision and approach? I ask it to anybody.
So actually, and Tom worked on the Avro Arrow. So I mean, that's sort of.
I had Tom in mind when I asked that question. I didn't mention the Avro though.
And, there's a saying that we never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, but I think that can't go on. That's not sustainable. I think this is one of the few, new, great economic opportunities for Canada. And we can't just keep missing them one after the other. We've just recently, with ICERA and my companies, and about 20-some companies across Canada, started a new Quantum Industry Association. That's like an important, valuable piece to get us there. But we do, like the challenge, this is hard, I'm not throwing stones here. It's a hard challenge, right? Because the jobs of tomorrow don't have lobbyists, in Ottawa and elsewhere advocating for investments in those industries, right? And this is true around the world. And jurisdictions that figure that out and say, well, I guess it's our job as the government to advocate for the jobs of the future, we'll win out and still be around and influential around the world in 30 years or even 20 years. So I do think it's critical to have, again, this is acknowledged now, something we invested in we invested probably over $1 billion creating this opportunity. We can't keep affording to let friends around the world, create the value, and then we just buy it back by selling natural resources. Like that's just not a sustainable economic model for Canada. So quantum AI, and again, we're also leaders in blockchain. We do need to capitalize, create more of the value, and export that value, and not just watch others do it for us.
Yeah, and I'd say I look at the ecosystem that's been built here, and I think it's about 1.6 or 1.7 billion dollars invested in Waterloo and quantum information science over the last 20 years. And I look at this as a very systematic view on how we're going to build sustainability here. If I think about Perimeter Institute, these are 50-year-old problems, right? This is looking at what is the big problem that probably nobody in this room will be here to see solved. And that creates a funnel that goes into the work that happens at IQC, where we start doing experimentation, refinement, and taking those big ideas and getting them closer to commercial reality. And now we have investment dollars, and we have 10, 15 startups here in Waterloo that are at the tail end of that funnel in commercialization opportunities. Now, that doesn't guarantee success, but we do have sort of the three legs of the stool here where we can take a 50-year vision and see how that funnels all the way down to commercial reality. And the work to be done is how do we capture that in an advantage where Canada benefits commercially and economically, and we don't just take that IP and sell it off to somebody. And there are passionate people in this community who are very vocal in lobbying for better protections for Canadian IP, better better measures to ensure that, you know, we can enjoy that economic benefit domestically rather than just, you know, sell it off to the highest bidder. And I think the opportunity is in front of us. We have everything we need in the quantum information science side of things to build this ecosystem and expand on it on a global basis, and do that from right here in Canada.
Just building on that, if you look at the talent gap within quantum, I think Canada's done a very good job at the front end of world-class universities, world-class organizations. But when those people graduate, we have the world coming and picking off those graduates. And if we don't have, you know, places like the Lazaridis Center that incubates startup organizations and provides opportunities, those smart minds are going to go to, you know, the highest bidder around the world. And, you know, we may not be the highest bidder. Now, our friends to the south have been very helpful with making Canada a more attractive place to want to work. So we've got to, you know,
Can't count on that going on.
well, I won't go there. So as a little bigger country than Israel, but as a relatively small country, a middle player, we've got to take advantage of all of the things that we bring to the table. And, you know, being in Canada is a really great place to be. So.
Well, and part of that, and you know, it's been my experience kind of building my own company, is that showing that you can solve some of the hardest problems from a technology standpoint and do that here is what helps retain some of that talent. Like, a lot of people under this impression, if I want to go make my mark and I want to go and solve hard technology problems, I have to go to Silicon Valley. But what we're seeing now is there are companies that are, you know, taking these audacious goals and saying, we have really hard technology problems that are far-reaching and that are impactful. And I think that's part of the narrative to keeping talent in Canada. We can solve these problems here. You don't have to go outside the country. You don't have to go to Silicon Valley. The weather may be nicer, but, you know, this is a great area to focus your intellectual capabilities and solve those hard problems and take those challenges on. And the more we start doing that in any domain, but particularly in the quantum one, the more I think we create stickiness for the talent, where we don't have that same level of brain drain. And I'm finding it helps, and certainly work, Ian, you've been doing for 20 plus years now, to create a hub here in Kitchener that says we are, again, solving hard problems. Just makes this a stickier region, and I think the whole country benefits from showing that we can take on these challenges here in Canada.
So interesting comment, Scott, about, I mean, I am an ecosystem practitioner, and I'm a big believer that it's actually these ecosystems with density and opportunity that are going to not only retain talent, attract and retain talent, but also it's the ability to be able to build things of scale that allow us to retain intellectual property as well. And we're early on, but again, it comes back to this remarkable bet that Mike Lazaridis and other collaborators have made on saying this is an area that we can lead, but we have to do so thinking about the entire, you know, life cycle of discovery all the way through to product. And we need to think about density, because these functions, these ecosystem principles that really form the basis of competitiveness. We actually just did an article recently and went out and interviewed a bunch of the graduates from engineering at the University of Waterloo, and they spoke to the fact that they wanted to work on leading edge and interesting and world-changing problems, and that was the lure of companies outside of Canada.
Yeah. But one of the things I'm saying, I don't know if you're seeing it, but I'm seeing like an increased openness to Canadian companies who want to collaborate with each other and say, you know, together the sum of what we do is greater than our individual things. And I think that's encouraging, right? So we're seeing smaller companies go, you know, if we put our solutions together, we can build a domestic Canadian solution that is world-class. And it's something we can't do on our own. So I'm seeing this openness to collaboration that I don't think I saw 10 years ago here in the country, which I think is encouraging to, you know, more people wanting to say, let's succeed on a global scale. It's not enough, you know, I think if you go back to the early days of technology in this region, if you were in Kitchener-Waterloo and you had a startup, success was you were going to sell in Toronto. right? And I had a customer in Toronto, maybe it's Royal Bank, and then I had a customer in New York. Now we see the startup community going, well, if we find ways to collaborate, we can succeed on a global scale, but we can't do it on our own. And I think I'm encouraged by this kind of new openness for collaboration across companies that allows us to deliver world-class solutions.
And we're seeing collaboration. I mean, it is our sort of what's the water of Waterloo historically, going back 200 years, but we're also seeing it across multiple industries as well. And so we see this collaboration that's happening right now between University of Waterloo and Manulife and a whole bunch of tech companies in town focused on how do we become the world leading place around future of work and living. And so I agree 100%. We have to we're too small. We have to gang up together to take on the world. Orna?
So I think I listened to you, and of course I come from a different system, but that system is human-made, and from what was said here, basically it's a scale and a risk matter. And for risk matter, often it's a financial risk matter, and you want to have certain tools. A VC, for example, venture capital by itself, for example, will not invest in very high risk if they don't have some risk sharing. And I look at even the very conservative Europe, which normally is very bureaucratic and moves quite slowly. But I have to say that they understood that the area of quantum science and technology has a different level of importance for everybody, and consequently, starting companies that are in some way affiliated with the EU and with the flagship programs are getting additional assistance with very minimal requirements on IP sharing or retaining, because first and foremost, they want to see results that are coming there. Now, if I look at Israel, and I think that there is a possibility for Canada to actually replicate some of its infrastructure. So venture capital is definitely one. Government reduction of the financial risk taken in the be it value of death or value of incubation is another one. There are several tools that if you would put them together with the academic quality, with the experience that has already been gained by many, the leadership and such, you could in Canada retain far more than is being retained at this time, and without, instead of Microsoft offering a position for each one of your graduates, having Microsoft do some of certain activities in this discipline here, why should they go to Denmark, to the Niels Bohr Institute? So something structurally in terms of policy and focus could be made here that is strengthening the ability to retain the people, because many of the people are interested firmly in seeing at the fastest way getting to results in their areas of expertise. And that is when you feel the need and when you feel the urgency and you feel that you can actually be a part of it and you can be a winner and first in the world and all kinds of other things, there is nothing better than that for people who really are engaged with what they do. And that's probably a backward analysis that needs to be done of what is being done in other countries in order to actually promote that part of the knowledge, to not only because you want to make people rich, or it's not that I'm against it, but you want to make people have emphasis on marginal impact and to allow the marginal impact to happen here. And that brings you to group together and make significant results locally, which you have done in the past in few areas, and then right now it's a little bit dissolved.
I wanted to take the opportunity to thank, first of all, Orna for coming and visiting us, Lois and Scott and McKelly. This has been a very interesting conversation. I'm just feel very lucky to have had a chance to play a role in it. I think that there's really some more important lessons here for us. First of all, we are truly blessed to have a major player in this global competition called quantum. We do need to think about not just the science, but how do we actually apply this across industries in a way that makes us competitive, both from us doing it for our own industries, but also in building these tools. I think this notion of team is important. We are a small country with lots of different constraints based on our size. But really the opportunity that lies ahead for us is really to think about ourselves as to how do we go to market together, because we are small, and there are a lot of other big countries and big companies that are making massive bets in these areas. And then the final thing is, I think we just need to always learn from the past, whether it's the arrow or it's the nuclear industry, but more importantly, how we have become world leaders in hockey. It is a great roadmap for us to success that really captures much of what we said today. So I wanted to thank you all for joining us and invite Dean Kelly back to the stage for final comments.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion. I think this is a fascinating issue that I think is extremely important in terms of both government policy and what we're doing here. My job is easy from now on. I just to invite you to lunch. Lunch is being served through the doors here. Give you a chance to talk to each other, to talk to our panelists, and I want to thank you again for visiting us. We're delighted to have you, and please join us for lunch.